Welcome back to Reier on YouTube. This time following the Alabama Crimson Tide's 40-35 upset loss at the hands of the Vanderbilt Commodores Saturday afternoon in Nashville, Tennessee. Vanderbilt, for the first time in 11 tries, knocks off a number one ranked team. And it really wasn't a fluke. If you're kind of tuning in, expecting me to make you feel better, rub your shoulders a little bit and say, hey, everything's fine. This was a fluky one off. No, it really wasn't. It wasn't enough of Alabama being complimentary in how it plays the game. Big plays on offense, that continues to be a theme, and that's great. But when you think about what Vanderbilt was able to do offensively, connected to the defense, and then special teams, as big a error as there was in the game, Alabama with the two number twos on the field together. So we'll get into all of it. We'll take your comments here in the show chat. So if you want to jump in, feel free to do that. We're here for as long as we're needed. I feel like kind of Dr. Melfi right about now in The Sopranos. But speak about psychiatric help and things like that. This Alabama team now, you just wonder exactly where it is, because the hope was coming out of Georgia that second half and really that fourth quarter, even though you won the game, you learned some tough lessons maybe about finishing games and being consistent throughout the game. Nope. It did not happen. Vanderbilt coming off the bye week. And I know you can point to that, but look, and it was a emotionally and physically draining game against Georgia last week for Alabama, but Alabama was off the week before that. This wasn't an Alabama team that's going to be like the one that takes on Missouri later in this month after it plays four in a row or so, comes off a road trip to Tennessee, that type of scenario. That wasn't this Alabama team today. This was an Alabama team that should have been physically capable, did have some guys missing. I won't argue that point. Kendrick Law is bigger to this football team than people realize. I understand that. You had some guys that gave it a go that probably were less than 100% as well. We saw Gino Vandermark in the game at offensive guard for Jaden Roberts at times on Saturday, but ultimately Vanderbilt was the better prepared team. The team better prepared for the biggest moments in the game, especially on offense. Because once Alabama gave up the free possession at 13-7 on the multiple number twos on the field together, and of course, Kalen DeBoer was asked about that in his post-game press conference, and he said it was something they were very aware of. But I talked about this too on Spaces at halftime on X, on my X account. It's got to be tough to manage when you're rotating as much as Alabama does, not only on defense, but also in your return people. You got Cole Adams back there in some situations. You got Ryan Williams back there. And in that one in the first half where you get flagged, you're in essentially your base defense because you're playing punt safe. It's a position on the field for Vanderbilt. It's a down and distance for Vanderbilt where you're anticipating the potential for a fake. So you're on it from that perspective. The problem is you still got Xavier Brown in the game at corner, and you're running Ryan Williams out there as your punt returner. That's not going to work. And it didn't. And then again, complimentary football. Vanderbilt takes the opportunity and punishes Alabama. Goes down, defense can't get off the field. And again, defensively, I understand. Last week for Georgia, a completely different preparation than what you were going to see from Vanderbilt. And I've told you guys, and I know a bunch of you feel the same way. Diego Pavia is a baller and has been. And he's an old dude, too, on top of that, who doesn't like to lose. And, it came down to a game where ultimate competitors, not to downplay Jalen Milroe's game. He had the two turnovers, got hit there in the second half. That was a big moment, no doubt about it. You're down 5. You're feeling like we're going to go down and take the lead and maybe hit the 2-point conversion, go up a field goal and try to hang on here. But, this offense also continues to put some guys in some one-on-ones where they got to be better than they were. And they got away with it a couple of times earlier in the game in terms of edge pressure off the right side of the offensive line. They didn't get away with it. They didn't get away with it there in the fourth quarter on the strip sack. And I know you can say, well, Jalen's got to get that ball out hotter. He's kind of standing there. And sometimes you can be fooled into believing, that you're going to have a lot of time down in and down out when that's not going to be the case. But again, I can go team wide with this situation. I can start with the coaching staff. I mean, that's where it's going to go. I think for most of you folks, in terms of what the hell was the preparation like last week. And part of the problem Kalen's going to have this week and after this kind of loss to this Vanderbilt team is that this Alabama team is really out there, and certainly in comparison to Nick Saban teams. And I'm not second guessing it at all. I'm just telling you what's the difference in some ways. You everything is coming into a question now for Kalen DeBoer. Do I think it's time for Alabama fans to panic? Absolutely not, because the sample size with Kalen DeBoer still tells me this guy is a high level coach. Seen him do it, not just at Alabama in the first 4 or 5 games, but obviously at his previous stops. That being said, the Alabama standard doesn't change for anybody. And the Alabama standard, we can talk about the Georgias and the Clemsons and the Ohio States and all the blue blood types that Alabama sees almost on an annual basis, it seems like. But where the standard really starts is if Alabama is supposed to beat you, Alabama beats you. That's it. And it kind of goes from there. And then, Alabama has done the things it's done at the championship level. So I've always said you're not the head coach at Alabama until you lose a game. But typically, I guess you could go back to Stallings and, lost to Southern Miss, but he kind of got Diego Pavia in that game because Brett Favre beat Gene Stallings, I think, in his debut game, and that 3 straight that he lost back in 1990 as the new head coach. But I'm not saying Diego Pavia is Brett Favre by any means, but give that dude a lot of credit. Give Tim Beck, the offensive coordinator, in terms of preparation, Tim Beck put a clinic on. Some of the things that you worried about that you had seen maybe in some spots with this Alabama defense really came into full view against a Vanderbilt offense that kind of figured if you just accounted for Pavia enough, you'd get enough stops, maybe turn him over. Although Pavia doesn't turn the ball over, and you end up -3 in turnover margin today. Those were the kind of things that had to happen for Vanderbilt to do what it did. And again, it wasn't a fluke. It wasn't like Vanderbilt just got every break and won the game. They also, when they needed to close the game out, Alabama had no answers. And not just in terms of perimeter plays, there was a mix. They were pounding the rock between the tackles, and then they had some really well-timed and well-designed stuff to the perimeter. 4th and 1, when the biggest play in the game up to that point needed to be made. Who made the play? Pavia on the deep ball behind Malachi Moore. And so I can't really point to an area and say, Alabama caught a tough break. I think Alabama caught a hot quarterback who doesn't like to lose, who has an offensive coordinator who had been with him previously at New Mexico State, and also Eli Stowers, man, number 9 for the Vanderbilt offense. I mean, pretty much you knew the ball was going to him. A couple other guys hit some big plays in the game, but the 2 shovel passes, I mean, they both were big. Now, the second one, the first one didn't hurt as much. It was at the end of the first half. But when it happened, what were you thinking? You're thinking, that's going to come around again at some point because that was too easy. It's like Tim Tebow and Aaron Hernandez back in the 2008 SEC championship game with those shovel passes. And so, and it did. Came back around in the second half, made Alabama pay. And third down, I mean, we can get into everything else, but conversion plays, right? Going back to last week, whether it was 4th downs for Georgia, and then you look at this, Vanderbilt really without the presence of a dynamic outside receiver. Most dynamic receiver really is the tight end. It's kind of a hybrid guy is what I would say Eli Stowers is. He goes for 6 for 113 on 7 targets. So even though you knew he was Diego's guy, because he too had come from New Mexico State with Diego. On 7 targets, Stowers catches 2 balls, 2 of those being those shovel passes that went for explosives, both of them. And then, Cheryl hits you for the deep ball on the 4th and 1. So when the plays were there to be made, Alabama simply did not make them at all. These were 2 of the better touchdown conversion rate offenses where red zone is concerned coming into the week. Alabama goes 4 of 4 in the red zone, 4 touchdowns. Vanderbilt goes 4 of 4 also, but was able to kind of keep this into a 2-score game after the touchdown drive following the 2 number 2s on the field for Alabama on the punt return. And yeah, I know the stat in the box says 2 turnovers for Alabama, 0 for Vanderbilt, but make no mistake about it. The penalty on the punt return with the 2 number 2s, you were -3. That's a turnover. And then also, it wasn't just third downs when, again, Vanderbilt needed to convert a fourth. They didn't just convert it, they hit it for a 36-yard touchdown pass. So, all the ingredients needed for this type of historic loss to happen came into play on Saturday afternoon. Unknown Damone checking in here in the chat. By the way, if you want to jump in, let's do it. Unknown Damone says, look like I picked the wrong week to give up sniffing glue. I love Airplane. Great movie. I love Fast Times too, Damone, as you know. But yeah, it was an Elmer's kind of afternoon up in Nashville. Let's talk to Jonathan Franco here. This one gap 335 is not going to cut it. Hasn't done a great job stopping the run all year. Did not look prepared for the option. Poorly coached on defense. You're not going to get any argument, I think, from anybody in that regard. And as I said earlier in the show, I understand the preparation for what Georgia does really, really different than what you were going to see from essentially triple option football and a guy that runs it exceptionally well in Diego Pavia. So, whereas we talk about Kalen DeBoer, and not to put him in any way as a hot seat guy after one loss, I'm just saying the reality of this job at this place is that once you lose a game as the head coach at Alabama, now everyone really ramps up everything to see exactly what you and your staff are made of. And everything goes into the middle of the table. Everything's going to be questioned moving forward. But I think defensively, there's no doubt. I mean, I know a lot of you wanted more production from the running backs this week, and that did surprise me um, in this game. I talked about it here on the channel during the week. I thought that if Alabama just wanted to get in like a pistol and run zone with Jam or Justice, they probably could do that as much as they wanted to, because I saw Missouri do it to the tune of one of their backs going for 200 yards essentially against Vanderbilt a couple weeks ago. But when it came down to it, I mean, the numbers aren't terrible when you combine Jam Miller and Justice Haynes. Jam obviously had the explosive play for 32 yards before scoring, but they combined for 11 carries for 68 yards and the 2 touchdowns from Jam. And I'll also say this: I don't care. I'm not in that group that says, well, get the backs going. I don't care if your quarterback's your best player on offense. I don't care if he runs it 15, 20 times. So whereas, yeah, I did think this was a matchup in which the backs could have a bigger impact. If it meant winning the game, that Jalen Milroe had to have more than, let's say, 7 carries. I think a couple of those were sacks too. Yeah, he was sacked twice. Alabama did not have a sack of Diego Pavia. So really, he ran it 5 times. Now look, Alabama didn't have the damn football. Didn't have the football for 18 minutes in the whole game. This was exactly what Vanderbilt wanted to do. Convert third down, stay on the field, preserve that defense, protect that defense, and then put Alabama more in a mode of where it was not just chasing the score, but chasing the clock. And then you up the anxiety for a football team. And that's essentially what happened. 42 minutes time of possession for Vanderbilt. And, didn't really run it for big yards, but 166 yards on the ground. Alabama had 84. Now, again, that's where the time of possession goes in. But get off the field, and then you can run it more. But Alabama just defensively could not get off the field. What else do you got for me, gang, on a Saturday night? Patrick says, Patrick Sharpton, biggest concern for me from the game is Lawson and Malachi Moore giving up. There was a big play there when Alabama needed to stop on that final Vanderbilt possession. And Alabama wasn't able to make the play. A couple times Malachi got matched up and came up a little bit short. I, you know, I don't know. I don't know if they gave up. They gave up some plays, but I do know that at the end of the game, and I hate losing, and I'm pointing the thumb at myself in some of this. I haven't always been the best loser. Okay, I know that's not a revelation to people that know me, that really know me. I'm not. I'm better now. I'm a lot better now, but it took me 55 years to essentially get here. So I have some grace for younger people in that type of situation, but it wasn't a good look for Malachi late in the game either, with the unsportsmanlike and the football issue. And, Kalen was asked about that in the post game too, and about trying to get Malachi off the field, but he wouldn't come off. And, you know, and on top of all that, this guy's a captain for your football team. So young guy, hot. I know. Look, Malachi's been in that program a long time. You know, losing to Vanderbilt isn't an option, right? I mean, you think about the teams maybe Malachi has lost to through the years. Vanderbilt ain't one of them. So for him anyway, this is his Louisiana Monroe. And I'm not saying Vanderbilt is as bad as that ULM team back in 2007, but Alabama in 2007 was pretty damn bad too. So, you just don't do that. Patrick says multiple big plays when the right D call was made. I mean, I didn't come away from the game thinking that guys were just, there weren't like plays against bust, right? It did. I mean, and I'm glad you mentioned this, because I thought a lot of it went right back to fundamental football, right? I thought guys in the first half got a little hero ballish. You get out of gaps. And it's the ultimate test in assignment football when you go against a quarterback in a team like that. And everybody has to play into each other in terms of their assignments. And I agree. I think there were times where I'm not convinced it wasn't a good enough call. But it just felt like the fundamentals of it weren't there uh as much as they needed to be. Sully 462 checking in here in the show chat. Glad I didn't get to see this one as I had a family function to attend. We're anti fall weddings here at Reier on YouTube. Always have been. I've talked about that a lot. Uh and this may have been actually a good Saturday for an Alabama wedding after what took place this afternoon. James Thompson here in the chat. Get that ice cream for them boys. Uh, yeah. Not everybody likes ice cream. No, I don't think they're going to like ice cream this week either. 2 and 26 says, looked like they had no practice. I guess you're talking about the Alabama defense, because again, the Alabama offense relative to possessions in the game. Now, look, gave up the pick six. Even that, I'm going to look at it as more of, that was kind of fluky in terms of the deflection. Jalen tried to drive that ball in there to Ryan Williams, who, again, crazy, right? When you think about the catch there in the third quarter to get the feet down and keep running on a third and long. And it felt like it was already slipping away right there. And Ryan Williams was able to kind of stem it a little bit. But you need to get it together on the return game, though with Ryan. I mean, If he's in there, he's in there. If he's not, he's not. That's my opinion. I know Kendrick was out. Um, Emmanuel was back there with Cole on kickoffs, had a nice return there to start the third quarter. And you come out to start the third quarter and you have that drive and you have that return to get it going. You feel like, okay, this is where it's going to turn 23-21. And then Vandy goes down and pushes it again to a 9-point game. It just felt like Alabama was playing 9 or more down all day. And against a quarterback like this, it is a classic case of F around and find out. Just like it was with Johnny Manziel in 2012. I tweeted this during the game. Second quarter score from the A&M Alabama game in 2012 was 20-7. Well, it was 20-7 in this one in the second quarter on Saturday. Jeremy checks in here. 2 keys to the whole game. Third down and time of possession. Yeah. I mean, you convert at that type of rate like Vanderbilt did. That's just, and Vanderbilt was going to run the play clock down every snap. There wasn't going to be any hurry up. They weren't going to bail you out. 42 minutes of time of possession. Absolutely, Jeremy. I agree. Let's see what else we can actually air here. 2 and 26 chimes back in, says defense was initially exposed with USF mobile quarterback, now an option quarterback. I think it's problematic for a lot of defenses, man, because there's only so many defenders you have to account for blockers to start with. And then with that extra blocker, a good running quarterback probably going to hit you. I guess you could point to that. The thing about Diego, though, is unlike Byron Brown, is that if he's got open guys, he's going to hit them. And, he did that on Saturday as well. And by the way, South Carolina up next. And it wasn't pretty for the Gamecocks against Ole Miss earlier today. But South Carolina is going to look at South Florida and in a different way. Vanderbilt and say, hey, we got a couple quarterbacks we run. So yeah, you're going to see plenty of running quarterback again next week at Bryant Denny Stadium. Sully says last time Vandy beat Alabama was in 1984. They were due a win. Yeah. Here's the thing this is why it was so important, I think, for Clark Lee and Vanderbilt. This is Alabama show. I get it. But Diego is a one and done for Vanderbilt. So this was the kind of win that you really needed to get if you're Clark Lee. And you had already lost to Georgia State. I know you don't want to hear that. The Georgia State defensively gave up 32 to Diego and Vanderbilt, and Alabama gave up 33 defensively because the one touchdown was a pick six, of course. Second and 26. Secondary seems to lack a certain skill set. Linebackers looked lackluster. I just don't. I'm still trying to figure out sometimes exactly against the run what Alabama's built to take away. You got to take away something in the run game, right? Like we can talk about Pavia, but where they got put to sleep in the red zone and then closing the game out today was the backs too. I mean, it wasn't just Pavia. And all due respect to Cedric Alexander. And he didn't, it's 21 for 64. He got dropped behind the line of scrimmage a few times. I mean, it's 3-yard average, but it just seemed like when Vanderbilt needed it in big spots, Cedric Alexander got it done. 166 rushing yards. It's only 3.1 on 54 carries, but it just seemed like a lot of it kept Vanderbilt on the field. Jay Oda, I think that's how you pronounce this, says Elijah is a problem. I guess you're talking about Elijah Pritchett. He did. I mean, on the strip sack, that encapsulates what you're going to ask Elijah to do in one-on-one with an edge like that and kind of still even going back a couple of A-days ago where he had a sort of nightmarish performance. And he's been better. He has improved because the frequency of what happened today was a lot more a couple of years ago. So that's not to say that Pritchett hasn't improved, but there is still going to be the potential where he gets out over his skis, nose out over his toes, as they like to say, and bends at the hips and gets beat, gets beat pretty easily there for a strip sack. What do we got? Living a dream life says, not today anyway. We lost because our coaches didn't teach and players didn't learn who has quarterback dive or pitch versus an option based team. Pretty succinct there. The man cave report says no discipline. Yeah, penalties were a problem too in the game. I mean, two number twos on the field together, and you've got your special teams guy on the field. Like he's down there. It's not like he's in the box and trying to communicate down. I'm pretty sure he's down there. And again, I go back to Malachi at the end of the game. That's something you got to clean up. And if that's an issue where Malachi has trust issues with the scheme or what you're employing, then you got to get that figured out between your captain and I don't know if that's the case. But that seemed like more than just we lost to Vanderbilt. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's enough. I think for a lot of Alabama players that would be enough. But that was not and I appreciate, like I said earlier, I'm one of the world's worst losers, especially as a who 23, 24-year old even. Um, Maturity was slow in coming, but uh, whatever that stemmed from, that's still got to be something you address because that had the look of November 2007 at the end of the game. That looked like when Nick Saban went winless in November and it started to unravel in terms of those type of situations. I think Malachi is a stand-up dude. I think he's a good dude. Has nothing to do with that. But it does start at the top. And that, of course, starts with your head coach, your coordinators, and then as a captain, you know, he's got to, I'm sure he understands. Everybody's kind of looking to him to do the right thing. Fresh 10 drills here in the comments. Guys, Kane Womack has been figured out. That's 6 quarters of literally sieve levels of defense. Yeah, that was probably the most concerning aspect of it for me in the first half was that this wasn't just a bad start. Yeah, Xavier Brown had the big game, the big play at the end of the Georgia game. But man, that last quarter and a half was, and you can kind of look at it, and it felt like in the second half of this one, Alabama was more within at least contact of controlling the game, never controlled the game. Because part of that would be your run game is controlling things. And Alabama wasn't able to do that, really wasn't in a position to do that because the defense in part couldn't get off the field. Um, but yeah, I mean, just like with Kalen DeBoer, how he handles this from a team perspective, and then down to the unit level with Kane and this defense. Here's the thing about Alabama too, a place like Alabama, and I get this. Kane's been at Indiana, Kane's been at USA. I understand all that, and that this isn't me saying, well, them places ain't Alabama. Well, they're not. I don't have to say it. You already know it. But I get that at some places you got to do maybe some things that are a little bit unorthodox. You don't have to do that at Alabama. You really don't. You know, you don't have to mug up your edge defender between the A and B gaps in a 3-man front with 2 linebackers there. You don't have to do all that. I mean, this is Alabama. You've got, especially in a game like this, you've got the benefit of the talent. You can line up base as you want, without a bunch of stuff and take care of business. And so maybe sometimes simpler is better. We'll see. Um, what else do we have? Unknown Damone says Malachi was running his mouth the whole game. Yeah, I mean, that's that's something you see a lot of on the back end of this defense. They're chatty. They're chatty back there. Again, I think everything's on the table. I think everything that's been okay to this point, everything that a lot of people haven't had an opinion on. Now, there's been some rumblings, just like the music at practice and the different approach in so many ways. Freshmen talking to the media. I mean, it's a radical change from the environment that Nick Saban created. But at the end of the day, it's just about winning. So, if Kalen's going to kind of calm down this noise, that it's not me creating a narrative. I had somebody on Twitter say, well, here comes that narrative. No, it's not a narrative. It's the job. I mean, you lose a game like this, it's not your welcome to Alabama moment narrative. It is your welcome to Alabama moment, more so than beating Georgia or anything you had done up to today. When you lose a game, even to a really good team, your first loss at Alabama, when you lose a game, it's going to get kind of noisy. And when you lose a game, you lose your first game and it's to Vanderbilt. Hell yeah. Yeah. It's going to get really noisy. Here's the thing. I mean, here's the thing about Kalen too. I mean, and we'll see. Maybe this defense turns a corner and becomes excellent, right? Down the stretch. But the thing Kalen is, I would think, going to keep in mind is just like we talked about the defense and your approach on defense at Alabama, because you have the players. Same thing with your coaching staff, right? You don't have to overthink a lot of stuff. You can cast with a pretty wide net. And you get through this season and you take inventory of this football team. There have been Alabama coaches that stood pat on some situations in the past, and it ultimately, in my opinion, came back in large part to bite them. Uh, you know, I think every element of this program in the postseason is going to be hopefully evaluated that way. And it's still too early to do it. I know this is a bad loss, but I think it's still way too early to be at that point as you head into the second week of October. Yeah, we're getting more comments too. A lot of folks not happy with kind of player behavior. And I said it earlier. I mean, I get it in 2024. It's kind of what you need to do more of in this era. Um, when you talk about putting your program really out there, it's essentially marketing your program. So, I'm not going to be old guy yelling at the clouds when it comes to that. But you do expose yourself to criticism or second guessing when, you're heavy on social media, you're heavy in the public eye. You got players doing a lot of different things off the field. But again, it's a fine line in this era of college football. It has changed dramatically, even in the last couple of years. How you meld all that together, good luck. But there's a lot of recruits. There's a lot of recruits that are looking at Alabama going, damn, Ryan Williams, he's got his own podcast. Him and Jalen Mbakwe, they got podcast. They love that. And it makes Alabama even that more attractive. Now you can say, well, we're Alabama. We don't need all that. If they don't want to come because they don't have a podcast and we don't want them, I get all that. But it's not that easy for coaches when it comes to trying to incorporate talent into their program. Let's see here. What else do we got? Oh, I don't disagree with this. I mean, I said this earlier. I didn't think it was a fluke at all. I think Vanderbilt outplayed Alabama and outcoached Alabama. Took it to Alabama. Had Alabama catching on defense and had Alabama chasing on defense. And got just enough of some mistakes that you would need. And still, Vanderbilt was still going to need a little help. And got that. And then defensively, when you needed to make a play late, who made the play? Not Alabama. Vanderbilt with the strip sack of Jalen. Um, who else we have here before we wrap things up? Here is C. Jordan Howard. Does this rule out a deep playoff run or championship, in your opinion? Well, you know, the recency bias right now is going to ask the questions of, if you can't beat Vanderbilt on the road and you get into the college football playoff at, say, like a 10 or 11 seed, if it comes down to that, how are you going to win on the road in December? And look, I've said it time and time again, and I understand people freak out, even in close wins for Alabama, like USF. Every week's different. Every week's different. And with that, I mean, the mindset of a football team, the physical health of a football team, matchups from week to week. I still think Alabama matches up great against Georgia. I know a lot of people say, well, it's a good thing Alabama didn't play Georgia today. I watched Georgia against Auburn in parts today. I feel just as strong as ever that Alabama matching up with Georgia would be fine, because I know a couple things would be true. I know Alabama's engagement and preparation going into that game would be where it needs to be. And then just in terms of the matchups on the field, I'd feel confident that Alabama would be able to hang in, for sure. But no, I don't think. Again, as I said earlier, too early to jump off the wagon of some of these players, too early to jump off the wagon of this coaching staff, and too early to jump off this team potentially being still a team that can make a run. But you got to make the playoff first. Playoffs? We're talking playoffs, deep run. Herm Edwards. You got to make the playoff, and as I said earlier, unfortunately, it doesn't seem as if Alabama was able to get the lessons it needed from especially the second half of last week in a win. That's your hope after a game like that too, is that maybe this team got the double bonus. Got the win when it looked like maybe it wouldn't, but then still got the lessons about focus and every play having a life of its own and all those things we've heard about throughout the years. And the answer today was that no, this team needed a loss. Well, now you have a loss. And now you think about what big picture wise might be enough to get you a spot at the table eventually. I think 10-2 has always been the number, to certainly almost guarantee yourself a spot. If you're Alabama with a win over Georgia and you're 10-2, that should solidify it. But I think how this loss is treated is going to be largely up to Vanderbilt, right? Because just in the last 2 weeks, the loss that Ole Miss had at home to Kentucky, that was brutal. But give Ole Miss credit. Bounced back this week, took care of business on the road at South Carolina. So it's to be determined, man. We still got so much to learn about this football team, and we're going to learn more now, because everything we thought we had learned, that was when it was all cherries and cream, strawberries and cream, right? Well, you learn a lot more about a team and its fiber and its backbone when the crap hits the fan. And there is feces in the fan tonight in Tuscaloosa. Not time to panic, but there is a lot to clean up. And if there is a silver lining, is that you got South Carolina at home next week instead of staying on the road and going to Tennessee. Although last check, Tennessee was kind of mucking it up with Arkansas on the road, but still a long way to go. Long way to go, guys. Too early. Too early. I get the angst. Keith here checking in. Oh, he says 10-2 somehow does not look possible. Well, with this loss that you already had in your back pocket going into the season, I'm Diego Pavia's self-professed biggest fan, and I very much had this win in Alabama's back pocket. So, even with a great appreciation for Diego Pavia and Tim Beck, I didn't see this coming. But now you've got that loss, and then you're thinking Tennessee on the road. Missouri looks a lot more doable now. But every week's different. Every week's different. Missouri looked just overwhelmed by Texas A&M earlier today. Maybe Texas A&M's a team you consider. things change week to week, right? Then you get into November. LSU still looks, to me, still looks doable. You know, I've had some big injuries already. Harold Perkins out for the season, running back situation, not great. But after today too, I'm going to be a lot more measured, I think, on a on a weekly basis. And then even Oklahoma on the road. But Oklahoma, to me, I have to catch myself, because when I look at Oklahoma offensively right now, I go, they're not going to be able to score enough. Well, damn, you know, I just watched Vandy put 33 on this defense. And it wasn't, again, a situation where it felt like Alabama got it figured out in the second half. It was what? It was 23-14 at the half today. And even if you say, well, yeah, but 7 of those were on a pick six. Okay, so that's 16. But then Vandy still scored 17 more in the second half. You never got it figured out. It never got figured out. Anyway. All right, gang. I'm going to let you go. I'm going to let you get back to your Saturday night. It's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. It's still a good team, good roster. And as I said, we're going to find out. We're going to find out about this coaching staff. We're going to find out about the veteran leadership of this team, because there's been a lot of talk. There's been a lot of predictions. There's been a lot of positivity. It's all been positivity. This was a crash landing in B&A tonight, this afternoon. And we're going to see if this team with Kalen DeBoer and this staff can pick up the pieces and do it pretty quickly. If you haven't already, we hope you'll subscribe to the YouTube channel here, Reier on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button for us. There's a notification bell there as well. If you'd hit that, that would help us out tremendously. And a thumbs up is always appreciated as well. Travis Reier, once again, thanking you for joining us right here on Reier on YouTube. It's afTeRmath, and we'll be back very soon here on the channel. Until then, so long, everybody.